Good morning. It's a lovely rainy morning here in Accra, in Ghana. And it's an appropriate weather for research. So far, we have explored what goes into the introduction part of any research study you do, especially for those of you who are doing this as part of the requirement of graduate degrees. We have explored the background, statement of the problem, theoretical framework, the purpose, objectives, questions, and/or hypotheses. Now we want to look at what a conceptual framework is. And I will err on the side of caution and say this conceptual framework is for quantitative studies because they deal with relationships and differences among and between variables. So let's figure out what a conceptual framework looks like. And I am grateful for Swan and George 2024, who have given me simpler ways of explaining some of these things to you. Again, if this is the first time you are coming across these videos, we are looking at a study that wants to figure out how complex trauma relates to post-traumatic stress disorder and post-traumatic growth among adolescents living in informal settlements. A conceptual framework is a representation of the relationship you expect to see between your variables or the characteristics or properties that you want to study. So a conceptual framework can be written or visual and are generally based on a literature review of existing studies about your topic. Before you start collecting your data, you need to consider constructing a conceptual framework. And so that is why many institutions will require that you bring this either in the chapter 1 of your work or in the chapter 3 of your work, okay? So what the conceptual framework does is to help you to map out which variables you will measure and how you expect them to relate to one another. So in order to move forward with your research question and test a cause and effect relationship, you must first identify at least 2 key variables, your independent and dependent variables. Now that you've figured out your research question and variables, the first step in designing your conceptual framework is visualize your expected cause and effect relationship. So we will normally use boxes and arrows to help you understand these things. So to indicate a causal relationship, so one thing causes the other, each arrow should start from an independent variable, which is the cause, and point to the dependent variable. So complex trauma will lead to post-traumatic growth. This is the arrow here. We are saying complex trauma will lead to post-traumatic stress disorder. But look at this one. We are also saying that post-traumatic stress disorder could lead to post-traumatic growth. We'll see how that one works. And hopefully we'll share what the results are so you have an idea how the golden thread connects to the end, okay? So it's crucial to identify other variables because it's not just the independent variables and the dependent variables. There are other variables that could influence the relationship between your independent variable and your dependent variable. So early on, and without the literature review, which you have to do thoroughly, you can't really establish these things. So some common variables that affect the relationship between the independent variable and the dependent variable could include the moderating variable, the mediating variable, the control variable. And for this particular study, we didn't do all that, but I want to explain what these concepts are. So when we talk of moderating variables, or some people will call it moderators, they alter the effect of an independent variable on a dependent variable. In other words, moderators change the effect component of the cause and effect relationship. So if I know that this one relating to this is strong, a moderator could either make it weak or very strong. Okay, so it changes it. And then it's also important to figure out what a mediating variable is. It's so easy for us to confuse moderating variables and mediating variables. So to remember the difference, you have to think of them in terms of the relationship to the independent variable. So a moderating variable is not affected by the independent variable. although it affects the dependent variable. So if I say this is a moderating variable, it has nothing to do with complex trauma, but it will have everything to do with post-traumatic growth and maybe post-traumatic stress disorder. So for example, and I'm using study hours and IQ. So this is, I think I took this example from Grad Tutor or something. It's an online thing. So no matter how many hours you study, which is your independent variable, your IQ will not get higher. A mediating variable is affected by the independent variable. In turn, it also affects the dependent variable. Therefore, it links the two variables and helps to explain the relationship between them, okay? So moderator affects just the dependent variable, but the mediating variable affects the independent variable. Then we have control variables. So you have to consider these as well. These are variables that you need to hold constant so that they don't interfere with the results. So even though you really are not interested in measuring them for your study, it's crucial to be aware of them so that you will know how to put them on hold. So for this study, I would tell students, when we talk of trauma, complex trauma, we want to describe it as multiple traumatic events. And these are invasive, interpersonal, wide-ranging, long-term, that interacts with identity versus role confusion. And if you are in psychology or related fields, you know that when we talk of identity versus role confusion, we are talking of Erickson, okay? And then we break this complex trauma into two. So trauma experienced on self and trauma witnessed on significant other or trauma experience within the environment. And we explain post-traumatic growth, connecting it to the broaden and build theory. You remember when we're talking about the theoretical framework, we use Barbara Fredrickson's broaden and build theory. So what this one is what emotions are being used to expand adolescents' mindsets. So we are broadening it and then build psychological resources. Because there's no way you can tell an adolescent that from adolescence to age geriatric period, you will never go through trauma. It's not true. But if we are able to figure out how we can broaden and build their psychological resources, it makes it easy to activate those things. And so that's the essence of many of the studies we undertake as psychologists, because it's not just a written thing. You need to be able to cause a change within a particular community that you are undertaking the study. Okay, so your conceptual framework is bringing all your variables, your independent variable, your dependent variable, using boxes and arrows to explain what the relationships are. You have to factor in moderating variables, mediating variables, and any other control variables that you need to consider. So that's it about conceptual framework. In the subsequent video, we'll look at significance of a study and delimitation of the study. As always, thank you for spending the time with me, and feel free to share this video with your colleagues who may also be struggling with research. Bye.